At InDigital, we know the public safety professionals hold themselves to a high standard. In fact, standard doesn't do it justice. In over 25 years working alongside you, carrying millions of calls over our IP networks, your dedication has inspired us. That's why our ESI Net goes beyond industry standards, not only I3 compliant, but designed to adapt to future development for a network you can count on when it matters most. Learn more at indigital.net.
Here in Greenville County, we have 8 different places where a 911 call can be answered.
It is the largest county in South Carolina. It's a challenge.
The type of information that a telecommunicator gets from Radius Plus is location-based technology. You can see where the caller is, if they have a medical issue, if they speak a different language. They're immediately able to text to that caller in their native language. It reduces response times because it immediately gets first responders where they need to be.
If Within the Trenches has ever taught you something, open your eyes to what it is like to be a 911 dispatcher, or has inspired you to become one, then help support us and join our Patreon. Get exclusive bonus content, one-of-a-kind swag, discounts on merchandise, ad-free early access to new episodes, and much more. To join, please visit patreon.com/WTT podcast. And if you're an industry partner, we have something for you as well. And now, for the show.
This is Jordan, and you're listening to the Code 7 Podcast Network.
Warning. This episode contains the 3 A's of podcasting: adult content, adult language, and awesomeness. You've been warned.
Welcome to Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them.
Hey, what's going on? This is Ricardo with the Code 7 Podcast Network, and this is going to be Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them. This episode is sponsored by InDigital, as well as Rapid Deploy and Carbine, and a big shout out to patrons, as always, for everything. Thank you so very much. I would not be able to do everything that I do if it wasn't for all of you, and of course, all of you who are here, who watch, listen, share, and support. So thank you so very much. And I think we're up to date now. I had a bunch of episodes on deck, and episode 415 went out last week, and we've got new ones that are already building up, and new episodes of the DRT, the Dispatchers Roundtable, are going to be coming up as well in December, so make sure to look out for that. And working on different virtual events that are going to be coming up, and there's just so much going on, so make sure to check that out. You can head over to withinthetrenches.net and find out all the other new stuff that is going on. And then, of course, everywhere on social media that you find Within the Trenches podcast, you can find all of the up-to-date information on where we are traveling, episodes that we're recording, and, of course, the entire archive of episodes. This episode is going to be 416, so there are many episodes out there. We have already fully surpassed 1.6 million downloads worldwide, and we're heard in about 55 countries. So make sure to check that out. It's been an honor. It has been so awesome. And again, there's a lot more that's coming. Also for the DRT and Open Mic Live, for patrons, a perk for patrons only is that they get the audio versions of the Dispatcher Roundtable as well as Open Mic. And for Open Mic, that's weekly. So that's weekly extra episodes, and then bonus content with Singing Badly in My Car. We've got some new ones that are going to be coming up with that as well. So make sure to check that out. And we are closing in on the end of 2021 and going into 2022. And it's just been a blur. When it gets into these months with all the holidays, it's like, where the hell did the time go? But we're having fun, and I am excited for my guest today. And my guest today, his name is Tyler, and he's a former dispatcher out of Minneapolis 911. Hey, what's going on, man?
Not a whole lot, Ricardo. How about yourself?
You know, I'm actually just fresh back from a week that I was just traveling. I was off doing some stuff with my brother-in-law and some friends. We went to go see the Green Bay Packers play the Seahawks, so we were out at Lambeau Field. Had never been there before. that was pretty interesting. They're all Seahawks fans, and I thought I was going to go in neutral, but they had Seahawks stuff for me, and I thought, man, we're going into the Lions den with all these Packer fans. So it was it was pretty interesting. It was a lot of fun. We were right on the 50. We had excellent seats, but the Seahawks got destroyed. I think it was like 17-0 at the end of that game. And
It makes it easier being an away team when your team is losing too. They tend to razz you just a little bit less. So
yeah, but the funny thing though is that we left a little bit after the 2-minute warning, the last quarter, and there were over 78,000 people in Lambeau. And as we're leaving, we're halfway down the steps to take off, and the entire stadium starts singing na 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 hey 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 goodbye. And it was so funny. Like the people that I was with, like they were a little salty about it, but still good sports. And I was just dying laughing the whole time because I thought, if you're going to kick someone out of your home field, that's exactly how to do it. I would have done the same thing. And people are just like in my face as I'm walking down, and they're just like singing and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, like this is great. It was such a good time. And then, the next day we ended up going to see the Rolling Stones in Detroit, and they put on an excellent show. And then I was in Florida doing work with the Denise Amber Lee Foundation for the rest of the time. So I'm back, freshly back, and we're here to record this episode. So things have been really good, man.
that's awesome.
So I want to get started here because you sent an email in and you had a lot of information about not only your time in dispatch, but you've been doing a lot of stuff in public safety, a combined of 32 years, just all condensed into like 14, right?
Yep.
And so there's a lot to cover. So but I'm excited to have you on because of some of the other stuff that we're going to talk about as well. But how did you get into, I guess let's start with just public safety. How did you get into public safety to begin with?
Yeah, so that's an interesting little thing. I want to be a fighter pilot as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
My eyesight went to hell, and so I had to find a new dream. Well, I decided to kind of emulate my mom's father, who was a lawyer, and wound up at Hamlin University, 2006. And in 2007, I walked into their student dispatch center for the security department and walked out with a job in February of 2007. And that just kind of was the catalyst for it. I love back in, the security dispatch center, we had card read doors. We had the ability to grant the access and then help out with the reports as far as getting them started, and closed caption TVs. And it was a lot of fun to kind of work with the officers and see how everything went behind the scenes. Then 2009, when I left college, it was the top of the recession. So there was 1,500 applicants for a single CSO position or something like that in the cities. It was so barren as far as the work goes for the number of applicants. And I spent a year bumming around at Target and wound up getting back into it as security patrol and then supervisor at Hamlin about a year later, and was in public safety all the way through April of this last year then. So wow. While I was at Target, I was I was slinging boxes in the back room for $8 an hour. I just felt like I had to be doing more. And I walked into the local volunteer fire department and filled out an application. They they stuck a cutter for a car, hydraulic cutter into my hand. They go, "You ever played with one of these?" I said, "Nope." They go, "Now's your chance." And so it was the application. I hung out for a week, and then the next week they processed it and said, "Come on back." After 6 months, I was voted on, and it was the best career move that I made at the time. Even though it was a volunteer thing, it really gave me a purpose. So,
man, that's one way to bring somebody in, is to give them some big ass toys and be like, "Have you ever tried this before?" Like, no, let's do it.
And like butter. When you say like butter, as far as that hydraulic cutter goes, I put it on the A pillar of that car, and I turn all it was, you hold it up and you turn the dial on the backside, and that clamp shuts, and that cut through it just so smooth. Couldn't believe it. And I was hooked.
Man.
So that was my thing when I was on the fire department. Extrication was that was my bread and butter. I love that.
Oh, geez. So you end up going in there. I guess what was the training like? I mean, you got a taste of it right off the bat to
Oh yeah,
to lure you in to to see if you wanted to do something like that. Man, they would have had me too. I've been
that
like,
was the
let's
best
do this.
interview. It was the best interview ever. Yeah. So then what they do, even most fire departments volunteer, they have a minimum requirement of training, especially to get funding and stuff like that through the state. So you have to have a certain number or percentage of your firefighters up to speed, and I think they have a certain time frame now to keep the funding coming. Um, so for me, it was fire 1 and 2, and then hazmat ops. I went and got an EMR certificate as well. Then at that point, with advanced pediatrics, and then I wound up. When I left that department and we moved jurisdictions, I was EMS captain in charge of their entire EMS program training and stuff like that.
So you end up doing both there. What did you like more? Or were you did you have a favorite at that time?
So I did that in conjunction with a lot of other stuff. So I was doing it at the same time I was a security supervisor, and
Mhm.
then subsequently a 911 dispatcher. And so, like I said, a lot of those those years were spent as dual and triple responding. Um, I loved firefighting, just because of the contact. It's hard to explain, but when you respond to a scene and you see somebody at their worst, holding their hand and being that tether, essentially saying we're going to do whatever we can to help you out, and we're going to make sure that you're all right. You know, having that one-on-one connection is phenomenal. Whereas what I would say with the dispatching in and of itself, the cognitive dissonance that came along with it allowed me to do it a little bit longer than some of them down at Minneapolis. No, it's bless the gals and men that have been there for decades and decades, and they keep doing it. Um, but the dynamic type of calls that we got at Minneapolis was exponentially more than anything that I'd ever responded to.
Mhm.
So I mean, with both there were pitfalls, and with both there were benefits. So I got into the firefighting thing, like I said, because it gave me a purpose and it gave me a direction. But I wound up finishing out my public safety career at 911 dispatching. So
So then when you were going back and forth and you were doing this also, security and all this dual triple response and such, how did you end up falling into then the dispatch part of it, 911 dispatch on this sense here in public safety?
definitely. So I had done the student dispatching from February of 2007 to June of 2009,
Hmm.
and it was just kind of a natural segue after I wanted to get something a little bit more uh, out of public safety in that regard. So working as a security supervisor, you get it all the time. You get your rent a cop, you get wannabe and that sort of thing. So actually, ironically, I'm working on a book titled Wannabes, time at the security, and it's a lot of the
Hmm.
stuff, the shenanigans that we do behind the scenes and that stuff. But um, oh, there were some things, and what was great was the university was really dynamic. As far as their location and then their student population as well. So we were right in the midway between Minneapolis and St. Paul, and ironically, had a halfway house just across the street next to one of our administrative buildings. So I mean, it made for some seriously colorful incidents and that stuff. And then Snelling Avenue ran right past it, so you get a lot of the stuff down towards the state fairgrounds and all that here in Minnesota. So, but it just it was one of those things that at that point, unless I wanted to get into administration, I had peaked, I'd capped out, and there really wasn't anywhere else to go that. Well, we used to say if you were in it for 5 years, you were a lifer, and I got out at four. I got out at 4, so
Nice.
I was going, I'm not going to make this my career. And
Yeah.
Minneapolis wound up. They were hiring at that point. They had there's a little bit of rift going on. They had gone from 2 job classes, so initially being hired on as an operator and then subsequently promoting as a dispatcher, as a 2-stage dispatch center, to 1 job class of 911 dispatcher, and the anticipation that when you were hired on, you would cross train across all of the positions there. And so I got hired on. I believe, the second hiring group, but the third class that they took on after that. So there was a little bit of turmoil and kind of discourse amongst the ranks, the rank and file down there originally when I got started as a dispatcher then. So, took on as the call taker, and it it was really kind of cool because at the time when I walked through the doors, there's a few different points in life where you feel like that's going to be just the next natural step. Walked into the college that I attended, and I just immediately when I got out of the car onto the parking lot, and I just took a look at the grounds, I knew that was where I wanted to go to school. And it was the
Mhm.
same thing touring Minneapolis 911. It was just that felt like the next natural progression then at that point. So I walked through the center, met with the people down there, and they say your coworkers are 9/10 of the job down there, and it was huge. Absolutely, they were, because even with the discourse and that, I would say about the same percentage, nine out of the 10 were rather welcoming and very helpful and appreciative. Because let's face it, that meant a little less overtime for them. So
True, right, yeah, 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 of course, everyone wants to be, you know, welcoming, and, and everyone there is welcoming, and yeah, like you're saying, there are a few that'll be like, "You need to run," or whatever, it's like, can you not say that to them until they've been here, you know? Like, come on.
right,
Oh, yeah, there's always one in every center or two, but,
yeah.
so you're walking in, and you feel like this is the next step, but do you remember what that was like, looking around, like, what is it that you're looking at? Like, how many people are there? And, I mean, even, like, some of the consoles, like, what do they look like? What was that for you going in? You immediately know that this is something that you wanna do, but what else was there? And the reason I asked too is because when I first walked into the last center that I was at, that I finished off my career, I was slightly overwhelmed, and only because the person that I saw on phones was like doing all different types of things and doing it very well, but me thinking, "Damn, am I going to be able to do this?" Because they're like also eating at the same time. How are they doing this?
Yeah. Yeah, the first thing that I remember was there's no way they fit this under this building. So you walk in on the main level of the
Hmm.
of the dispatch center, and there's kind of a gallery that overlooks the dispatch floor. And the dispatch floor, it's almost 2.5 stories high with this wide, high kind of sweeping almost roof and all of that, or ceiling. And it's very actually open for being. I called it the bunker. It
Hmm.
was underground significantly. It used to be, if I remember right, they dredged it out, and it was when the building was originally built, it was the horse stables for the city carriages. um so
Hmm.
yeah, it was significantly further underground. Then the next thought was, I was looking at these stations and I'm going, this isn't at all how I would have imagined this. For 911, a lot of people, I walked in with the common misconception that, it's it was a wider ranged department rather than just covering the city proper. So
Hmm.
even having been in public safety, I had a couple of misconceptions that were immediately squashed at that rate. Um, I I remember looking at the consoles and going, there are a lot of screens here. There are a lot of moving numbers. There are a lot of flashing lights. They've got a headset. And the next thought was, I can't believe they're tethered with all of this wireless technology that we've got going on. They've got this long cord, and it looks like one of the ones that, used to hang on the walls in the early 90s in our house. And you couldn't
Right.
walk more than 10 feet from the
The
base.
the
And
the
I'm
umbilical
thinking,
cord.
that's exactly what it is. Yep. And I go, how does this all work? And I remember it was a little overwhelming, but at the same time, there was more of this kind of awe when you looked at it and you go, I want to know how long it takes to get to that point. Because most of the people at that rate then, there had been probably 4 or 5 on phones, and we had up to 11 positions on the phone side specifically. It went up to
Mhm.
what we called T11, and then there were a couple of other auxiliary positions in that. So when you walked in through the main doors, there was a supervisor. I called it the fishbowl. It was a partition with windows across the top, and there were 2 stations there. But then on the right hand side was like I said, it was mostly open with a couple of positions that had half dividers and stuff just for integrity of the partition itself.
Hmm.
But other than that, it was a very open sight line, and most of them just seemed to be kind of kicking back, doing their own thing. A couple of them were talking, and call would pop up, and you'd see somebody spin in their chair and grab it and just go about their day. It was a really cohesive yet simultaneously relaxed sort of environment. And that was one of the things, like I said, where I walked in and I knew it was that next natural progression in life. It was just that atmosphere, and everything seemed to be kind of clicking at that point, which was great. The only thing I didn't like was they had up on the wall before they went to the upgraded phone system. They called it the overring beeper,
Hmm.
and it would just anytime that the phones would get into overring and you'd see it on, flash on the monitors where there's another call incoming and you didn't have anybody in ACD, it would start bonging. And that was a great day when that was disconnected.
Oh man, I bet. Yeah, I can just imagine how annoying that would be.
You get that in the background and you're going, I know, I can hear it. It's the reminder beep on the microwave when you're doing something else.
Right. Yeah,
I'll get to you
exactly.
in a minute.
Do you feel at all like everything that you've gone through, but kind of reflecting on it now, do you feel like that first day walking through, how you mentioned is kind of a relaxed, almost laid back environment a little bit, that when you were walking through that time, do you feel like that was a false depiction of what 911 is?
You
or
know,
or was it kind of like that?
it's overall, yeah. So I would say I walked in. It was in October of 2014. I don't remember when Ferguson all had happened, so it was right at the beginning of a lot of this kind of civil unrest in
Hmm.
that period. But still, even through all of it, it was phenomenal. And I harken back to that 9/10 being the coworkers and the employees down there.
Hmm.
It was just a stellar group of people, and their masterful approach to their job and their craft it was definitely exuded. And so I would say it was a vast majority of the days it was like that. Even in those situations, you would get something pop up and everybody, oh, hey, what was that? Oh, you look at it and you go, okay, and then go right back to what you were doing. And that was just it. So there, at the same time, then you'd have, with the two stages, you may have one section working significantly more than the other one. But at the same time, once everything calmed back down again, we'd chat about it and we'd go about our days. And it was just like that, almost like the tides. You could watch how everything moved about the center and how the calls flowed. And like I said, and I've used that word a lot, but the cohesive feeling of that environment it was wonderful. The relaxation significantly more than not, but there were definitely periods of time where that stress, that mentality, almost to the breaking point.
See, and the reason I ask is because there would be some times where we would have people come in to do a sit along, and sometimes they would be there between 2 to 4 hours sometimes, and there would be not a damn thing going on, and they would see that and they would say, oh, this is pretty easy, like it, you guys just kind of waiting for stuff to happen, and someone's reading a book, someone is watching the news on TV or whatever, or you just monitoring your monitors. And we would always say to that person, like, this is not a true depiction of what it's like in here, because when it goes to hell, it goes to hell. And they're,
Yeah.
they would sometimes people would say, oh, well, okay, no, I understand. And others would say, no, I got this, I could do this. And they're the ones who end up being the ones who split
Yep.
because they didn't get that right away.
Yep. Yeah. And I thrived in those situations for the most part. There
Hmm.
were a couple that I look back and I go, man, the riots in particular of 2020, and I go, the people that stuck around significantly after that and were able to weather that storm, they're a true testament to the work that's done down there.
Hmm.
There were several, and on the smaller end, the severe weather protocols and that stuff, where you go into just answering and triaging and dealing with a lot of that and passing some of the stuff off on 311, entering in calls, but not entering some of the others so that they can check them out, down trees, that sort of thing. There were just there were fun, stressful times. And then there were the not so fun, stressful times. So, I mean, you get that kind of end of the spectrum where being busy can actually be a good thing versus when you're busy, sometimes it definitely wasn't. So the vast majority of it, though, the calls that come through, especially on the more singular side, so on the dispatch side where you get the initial intake of a foot pursuit or a vehicle flee, something like that, those were always fun because there were so many things that you as a dispatcher had to do that didn't really impact the rest of the center as a whole. People would watch and they kind of take note, and the supervisors would kind of hover around a little bit just because of the high potential for incidents and casualty and all of that that comes along with it. But there overall, that was some of the more fun aspects of it was the busy times, because that's where one, the time down there went a little bit quicker just because you were doing something, but two, you get to really see how everybody click together. You're a cog in a machine, but that machine, when you're thrumming along and humming it, it's really cool to see how every independent piece works together.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And the busyness, I agree as well, that there's that good busy and then there's that bad busy. And then there's that busy where you feel like you've been kicking ass and taking names and you're just going and going and going. And you're thinking, man, we got to be halfway done with work. And then you realize it's only been an hour.
And typically at that rate, you've got a large situation and you fielded like the 15th or 16th call in 30 minutes for, hey, did you know? And you go, right. we're very well aware of that. We should have officers on scene there. Oh yeah, we just wanted to make sure. Thanks.
Like,
we're the ones that sent them.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, like we got it. Yeah. It's sometimes I'll now I'll be on a trip or whatever, and people are with me, and there'll be an accident or something, and someone will say, are you going to call that in? I'm like, no. Did you see the people that are around there? Someone has already called it in. Believe me. And it's not just the people that are standing there. They're also every single person who's passed by. No, I'm not going to call it in because it's already done. I'll end up being that person who is calling and them saying, hey, yeah, we've already had 80 other people call. If it was something that had just happened, that's different. Then I would be the one to call in or whatever and even stop to help out. But by the time I've passed by that and everyone is out there standing around, no, someone's already done it.
And at that rate too, the kind of taking that public aspect into it and the initial misconceptions. I always said that in order to graduate high school, they needed to have like public safety week where you have EMS come in and they go, these are the basics of EMS and first response. This is what you can do prior to our arrival. Police going, listen to our lawful orders and everything should be fine. And everybody gets their day in court if you think that you were unjustly grabbed. And then firefighting, outside of stop, drop, and roll. Here's some things that we can prevent it. And then 911. These are the times that you should call. These are the times you really need to call. And these are the times that you maybe don't need to.
Exactly.
My mom always used to say, don't call 911 unless you're bleeding from every orifice or you have a bone sticking out. So I think in my childhood, I cannot recall a time where I would have actually ever dialed 911. Just because that was what my conception was. And then I get down to Minneapolis and I quite literally had a call for somebody asking what time it was, and they're calling from a smartphone.
Oh, that is interesting. Yeah, that does happen. I used to tell people, they used to say, how many 911 calls do you get? And I said, real 911 calls or calls that are coming in that are not. And I remember friends and family, they would say, well, why would people call 911 if it's not an emergency? I was like, right? Yeah. Like, yeah, no, for real. Because, people, and I'm sure you dealt with this as well, people calling in for parade times, fireworks times, and all this other stuff. And when the call starts out with, I don't have an emergency, but then you're like, okay.
Oh, yeah. I called it the long well.
Yeah.
911, what's the address of the emergency? Well, you kind of sat back and you go, all right, this is gonna be good.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, man. When you made your transition and you were in training and everything, um, did you find it hard at all making kind of that transition? I mean, you were still doing the other stuff as well, but and the reason I ask is because I had a coworker and he actually still works there. He's a supervisor there now at the last dispatch center I was at, but he was coming in from like the fire rescue and EMS side, and when he was on the phone with someone, like I would hear him and some of the protocols that they had out in the field he was trying to go through over the phone. And after the call, I would say, dude, you're in dispatch now. Like these are different protocols and you need to go by our protocols because it's different than being out there. So he had to learn a little bit on how to switch that up. But did you ever find it difficult at all, trying to make that from being out in the field to being inside and not being hands-on?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the language, I had a hard time going from the technical terms to more of the layperson terms.
Hmm.
And one of them was a standard protocol was asking, are they awake and breathing versus are they conscious and breathing?
Hmm.
Now I used to say, are they conscious and breathing? Because consciousness, it being more of that alert, and that would, I guess, alert would have been just as sufficient. But people saying they're awake, well, when they're awake, there's a different level of awakeness, and most people don't. But that's something that I always wanted to articulate and from the field to, because you can be awake but not alert and conscious. You can
Hmm.
be in a semi-conscious state. What does awake mean? So that was one of the things that in particular I had my phone training extended by a day, I think it was, because they wanted to work on some of my language in particular. So um yeah, it definitely happened. The dispatch side, however, was significantly quicker just because of the language that came along with it, and I was able to associate with the responders. So a lot of that, the radio ear and picking up on that stuff was significantly faster for me to uptake. So but yeah, definitely on the phone side, especially going from the technical terms and all of that down to more of a common knowledge and common language, like, kind of like going from 10 codes to the 800 radio, the
Hmm.
simple language or the plain language. It was the same kind of transition for me. It was a little more difficult, but ultimately it worked out well. And then really truly, Ricardo, the difference was when we went, you see the transition from phones and call takers only to somebody who has the call taking experience mingled with dispatch and the quality of calls that come from there, because then you're anticipating what dispatch needs then.
Right.
So that's when that really started to gel. But yeah, on the initial side, that language, I can't really say barrier, but the language, lack of other terms, barrier for myself was the most significantly difficult part of that.
And I like that the fact that you had that experience already going into it. You had some of those terms down, and but also the talking on the radio. And what I'm getting at is, like, for me, when so I already had about 3.5 years of experience before I went to the center that I ended up finishing off my career at. But it was different because I started out working with a small police department, so I only spoke to PD, on the radio, and then also fire rescue and stuff. But it wasn't a lot of talk. There wasn't a lot of dispatches either because it's a small city that I was dispatching in. So I didn't have a lot of airtime. So when I ended up going to this other dispatch center, when I moved back home to Southwest Michigan, I was working out of the county that I grew up in. The call volume is way higher. The amount of officers that are out on the road, way higher. So I remember being on radios and training, and the trainer telling me, this is what you need to say. I'm like, okay, so I would say it. And then, sometimes in a response, I would look and say, how do you want me to say that? And they would say, however, like, just answer them, but for me, because I wanted to do such a good job, like, I wanted to say it right, because I
Right.
knew the officers were going to give me shit no matter what anyway. But I wanted to get the less amount of shit as possible.
Yep.
So it was hard for me then, trying to figure out that speech. And then finally, I it didn't last that long. I ended up just being like, all right, well, screw it, I'm just going to talk normal throw out some of these 10 codes or whatever, but just, just talk and go through it. And that was completely fine. But it was because I didn't have that much experience talking on the radio a lot with officers and such, and this is deputies, city, and troopers, that it was a little harder for me because I wanted to have my trainer tell me what to say, and finally she's like, nah son, you need to just talk, because you got shit that's going on and going on, traffic stops, so you just need to go ahead and talk. And that's what it took for me. So it's cool that you had that experience already going into it, talking on the radio a lot, and all of it, so that when you ended up getting on radios and dispatching, it was probably a lot easier for you, and knowing what to say.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. The the only difficult thing that I had with the transition, so I started out as a call taker, which is a normal progression for most of them. Some of them come in as a data channel operator and that stuff, which is relatively rare these days. But the caveat for myself was with the fire department background and all of that. I transitioned from phones not to data, which gives you that kind of that radio ear, and you're picking up and processing off-duty officer logins, NCIC stuff, and that sort of thing, just warrant checks, things where you're getting a little bit of radio traffic and back and forth, so you kind of pick up on that. I was plugged right into fire, so because of that external kind of extra, I call it extracurricular activities. So I got the opportunity to jump right into a dispatch position. The only difficulty that I had then at that rate was because I was so in tune with the fire side and the protocols that come along with that. With fire, you'd say received, and then you would repeat back to them what it was. So it was recorded twice, and then they knew that you were listening. That was something that I had a hard time then transitioning. I can't say hard. It was mildly difficult at that rate. I'd catch myself repeating or saying received or something like that, and then repeating what the officers had said. Squad 322, I'm on traffic stop here at this intersection with this kind of vehicle, run this plate. And then you copy all that back and you go, hang on, we still got more. You go, wait a minute, pump the brakes, or just say copy and it's type. You don't have to worry about all the rest of that. So yeah, that was a little bit of the kind of learning curve there, and I should have known it, having been in security dispatch, we just say copy, but that had been at that rate over 6 years since I had done any of that. So it wasn't a long, hard transition, but it was something that I catch myself doing every once in a while too still.
So then as you're starting out, like others on phones and such, do you remember your first call or any of your earlier calls as you're going through training and everything there on phones?
Oh yeah. So they kicked me in. Most of them, they said, we're going to have you sit along for about a day, and then we'll have you start answering calls. And the CTOs, there was a bit of leeway with each of the individuals on how they wanted to approach the training program, as long as you got the check marks, and then they were able to move the training on to the next stage. I got all of an hour and a half. And so the gal goes, all right, you're going live. I go, what?
Whoa.
I'm going, okay, let's see what I can do. And one of the first calls was up in Northeast Minneapolis. And a gal had her son. She had come up from either Edina or Eden Prairie, something like that. And she had her son pull a gun on her. She was just coming up to give him money. She heard that he had been on hard times, and he didn't like the amount of money that she had given him, and he wanted more. Thought that he deserved more. And I looked at her, and I hit mute, and I go, Is that a robbery of person? Is that a domestic with a weapon? She goes, domestic with a weapon. Get it entered, get it going. And I was like, okay. So I got that going. And then at the end of the call, she goes, and I got one request for you. If you catch that son of a bitch, I want you to tase his ass and then body slam him, because he ain't never going to pull a gun on his mama again. I lost it. At that point, I lost it. I go, you got to be kidding me. That was it right there. And I clicked off and I go, do I add that to the call? She goes, no, you don't add that to the call, but you send a message to the dispatcher so they can see that and laugh. I go, done.
Perfect.
Pretty good.
Oh man, that is amazing. See, I would have typed all of it in. So we had something that we did, we did this all the time in dispatch. Whatever the caller would say, no matter what it was, just like that, we would type it in. And sometimes the person on radios wouldn't read all of their narrative, and they would start reading it almost verbatim, and then they'd have to stop themselves. And we're like, ha. But our thing was that we're adding the information in there because if this goes to court, they're going to want all of the information. So we're just documenting it.
Yep.
Like we're doing our job.
There were a few. There definitely were a few.
Mhm.
And what was great about ours is all of our messages and everything like that you could subpoena. They could be public record if they needed to be. But there were
Yeah.
definitely a few calls where you get some of those in there, and for recorded purposes, you're going, you got to be kidding me. I have one. I was fresh off of police dispatch training. I was working overnights. It was the end of shift. It was about 6 a.m. Officers were swapping shifts and coming on, logging back in. And I was working on channel 1, and at the time then of day, it was the south side of Minneapolis. So this call happened to come down in precinct 5, which is down in South Minneapolis on the would be the west side of the freeway, and it was for a domestic. Weird. The initial weird thing was the guy was naked, which people sleep naked sometimes. It happens. I'm guessing. I
Right.
don't know.
Yeah.
It's too cold in Minnesota for that kind of shenanigans. But
Right.
there's some people that I guess are a little thicker skin.
Mhm.
It was the only thing that smelled a little bit off at the initial onset of the call, and I aired that he was definitely in the nudes. That officers weren't going to be just gobsmacked when they arrived on scene.
Right.
And next thing we know, he's now tearing the apartment apart, which I'm guessing it's a little cold. I don't know. He not happy about something. And I said, at that rate, and I sent a message over to the TC. I said, just tell him to go back to bed. This is not the way that you start your day. Take a nap for about, snooze it for half an hour. He can wake back up, just start fresh again. Nah, that was, he kicked it into overdrive. He broke a mirror and decided that he was going to light the mattress on fire within an apartment complex. Mm-hmm. So now we've got police coming. We've got EMS coming for lacerations to the hand, and we've got a full first alarm assignment for a potential structure fire and a mattress burning in an apartment complex. Officers get on scene, and the guy then at that point, so now he's bleeding profusely, has gone into the refrigerator and is throwing food from the refrigerator, slathered himself in buffalo sauce, and was running about the apartment that was filling up with smoke from this burning mattress, or smoldering mattress at this point, because he wasn't successful in actually igniting it. And I sent a message over to the TC, and I go, is this for real? She just, you could hear her hitting mute and just howling in the background going, I said, this, you cannot be serious. She goes, dead serious. She said, he's covered in buffalo sauce right now. They got there, and he refused to give up the piece of mirror that he had broken, and he was holding on to this shard, and they called for a taser. And I go, that's how they're gonna. This is how it is. I said, this is how I end my shift. Is this call? And I walked out of there just utterly stunned. Now I don't, and for the life of me, I don't remember if they had to tase him or not. We didn't have anybody on that was taser certified at that point. That was signed in. I asked the supervisor if they wanted me to tone for it citywide to request it. I think they wound up talking the guy down, but yeah, that was one of the calls right at the beginning of that. You go, all of that is in there, all of it. And so then we had the links on TriTech. You could just send the link for the ID or the call, the CCN. We'd send, I got back on the next day to the rest of the shift. I go, here's how I finished yesterday. I sent the CCN. Everybody's going, you got to be kidding me. Buffalo sauce. I said, and blood all over. I said, at that rate, I'd just gone back to bed. But yeah, absolutely. All of it, and some of that was, annotated with color swearing at TC. So, there's so much, you just can't even add all of it at that point.
Holy shit, man. You had a human buffalo wing there.
I know. had to put him in the bedroom, and he'd have come out just smelling strangely delicious, I guess.
Right.
There'd be some seriously conflicting scenes on that response side going, what smells? You do.
Yeah, you do, and it's slightly intoxicating. I'm gonna have to get some wings after this. How would you like to go to jail, though? We'll take you in. Oh man, that is crazy. See, and that's why I love doing open mic, because there's a lot of people who come on and they share stories like this. And there are some in the public who join in as well. And I'll sometimes get messages like, I didn't know that this stuff happened. And I say, yeah, this is life. Like, you wouldn't think it, but this shit happens. And, that's why, job security. Someone is always going to need 911, or someone is going to do something where they'll eventually need it. because of their own actions.
Well, we say the same thing. It's Darwinism and natural selection is what we used to say on the response side, and the same thing. It was just Darwinism specifically applied to 911, just because
Buffalo sauce.
kind of going against the response side here. I had a guy that had a really deep laceration to the top of the leg from a chainsaw. He was operating two without a break simultaneously.
What?
And had it come out of the tree at him and come across the leg. And I'm going, that right there is Darwinism. You almost take off your leg with a chainsaw. You had another one that was going without a brake and the throttle was on, and you knew it was coming. And then he cut down the branch that the one was hanging from the tree with. So I'm going, I would have loved to have been in dispatch at that one going, And so hang on, there's a second chainsaw involved now? Right.
Oh.
So which chainsaw? I got it now. Just kind of working through that going, on scene, I'm going, how did this even happen? And it's the same thing. It's all Darwinism, predominantly Darwinism, at least on the 911 side. The dispatch or the response side, then you get the natural selection where the guys are going down and then you got to fight against, obviously nature, but
right.
Yeah.
There's so much different stuff that happens in 911, and sometimes you just have to sit back and ask, is this real life? And it is real life, and no matter what it is, that's why we're there to help them because they some people can't help themselves, so we have to be there to help them and go through it.
Oh, and most people they go, no way, you're making that up. I said, my imagination is not that amazing. I cannot come up with some of these things that you hear. Like I said, the mom saying to tase him and body slam her son.
Yeah,
that is. I mean, it's comedic gold, but at the same time, you're going, there's no way that I personally could come up with that. Absolutely not. So yeah, like you said, the things that you hear and that go on down there, really genuinely, it's a gold mine for anybody that wants to write a great book or story. Or I think they do that. What is that 911 series or movie now? I haven't watched any of it because it was like any other firefighter flick or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
where they walk in and they got their jackets out and they got the fire going. A little bit of Hollywood effect. I couldn't come on board with it, but there's some good stories that come from it. Absolutely.
Yeah, the two recent 911 like reality type shows that have come out, they've actually been excellent. They've been really good and have depicted 911 and dispatch on the job in a very good way. So those two specifically, I'm all about. But the other 911 show, the one that's actually called 911, I mean, that's all drama. That's all Hollywood stuff. So I mean, it's all right. I watched the first episode, but that was it. But the other ones, they actually show some pretty good depictions of the job. So those two they've been done very well. So with your with everything that you did and experiencing, like, what was your favorite part? Was it taking the phone calls, or was it being on radio? For me, because and I'm sure you did this as well, but we had three different positions, and one was main phones, then main radios, and then we had our backup, one position that was backup phones and backup radio, but that was the position in Michigan. It's called lean, but what it is just NCIC. When you're running license plates and warrants and all that shit. So there was that one, but that one wasn't always fun. I mean, I say fun, and people listening who don't come from the same space are probably like, what are you talking about, fun? And I just mean that they didn't have a lot of stuff that was going on. I'm there to help someone. So I want to be either helping those out in the field on the radio, on main dispatch radio, or those calling in when they need help the most on 911. So that's what I mean when I say fun. I mean, the stuff that we're doing, lots and lots of things to go to. So if you had to choose one, I mean, what was your more favorite spot then in dispatch?
So definitely, to understand that question, it's a kind of a two-part answer. So Minneapolis's structure, you were initially trained in on phones,
mm-hmm.
and you were in ACD. So that was your job. That was your captive to phones. And like I said, then the next stage of progression was the data channel. We called it Channel 7. That was the warrant checks, NCIC, the off-duty officers, anything administrative, kind of essentially. You get the weather reports, you send it out if you got the National Weather Service beeping in. And then there was fire dispatch or police dispatch, depending. And then police dispatch was dedicated. We had, depending on the time of day, either 2 channels with a relief dispatcher or 3 channels with a relief dispatcher. And then there was fire dispatch. So we had initial primary dispatch on fire who controlled citywide. And then we had the backup dispatcher that was an auxiliary phones position as well. And I would say my favorite was the primary fire dispatch. One, because of what I had done outside of work, but two, when the shit hit the fan, it hit in a big way.
Mhm.
And whereas police was rather dynamic in their responses, you didn't have to always get the canine backing first and then the sergeant's approval and that sort of thing. You had to do fire in a specific order, or if you didn't, there was no going back. It was you had to restart it because it was like a waterfall. You're gonna go down, you're gonna hit the riverbed, you're gonna move downstream, and that was just it. And it was so fast. It was that fast. That was my favorite. You get the first alarm assignment going, you get the weather in there, you get everybody going, you get the deputy's acknowledgement, you send out the notice for all of the fire, all of the center on that one. You send out a citywide page so that all of the VIP, we call it the VIP page, which was all of the fire command staff, and then everybody else was aware that there's a structure fire going on. And then you send it out for all of the subsequent notices. You get a 2-2, 3-3, anything along those lines. That was, plus the language and that sort of thing. I thrived in that particular setting. That was my favorite. That one also because the scale of the calls that would come through too. Like I said, when it hit the fan, the fire is not a small incident in and of itself. Just on the number of units and rigs going on a first alarm, you'd end up with 3 engines, 2 ladders, a rescue unit, a couple of chiefs, then you get salvage and the deputy and all of that going. And that's a lot of units going and converging on a single focal point. And so keeping track of all the radio traffic at that and simultaneously, like you said, that initial person who was doing all this stuff and then eating at the same time, you get pretty good at it. And so, yeah, you can take a bite in between there, you sip in between there and just keep on rocking. One hand's doing this, the other one's working the mouse. And you almost become split brained at that rate where you've got just such a groove and a rhythm down. That was my favorite. And yeah, a lot of the responses that I handled were from that position, and that was hands down my favorite.
Man, you're taking me back. You're making me miss it even more. So, like, I do miss dispatch. I don't miss those long ass hours and like the county politics and some of the other toxic bullshit that was going on. But there are a lot of times that I miss it. And listening to you talk, it's yeah, it takes me back because I remember a lot of those fire calls too. One specifically where there was these kids who were out on the beach and it was dry out. We had a a red flag going, so no burning or anything, because of high winds and such. And these 3 kids it was 2 or 3 kids. They were out on the beach. It's the dry grass everywhere, and they were shooting off bottle rockets. And one of them ricocheted, man, and that entire beach caught fire. And it was enough to where it spread fast and up the beach to where these $1 million homes are. And I think at the end of it, it was almost about $4.5 million worth of damage. And it was spreading so fast that we had officers out there who were evacuating people and such. And this guy, I will never forget, this guy calls. And, I say my thing and get his address and stuff. And I'm asking what's going on. And he goes, so it looks like people are getting evacuated from the area. The house next to me is on fire, like fully on fire. Should I get out of the house too? And I said, sir, if you feel as though you're in danger and you see everyone being evacuated, do what is going to help save you. And later I was done saying what I was saying. He goes, my house is now on fire too. I'm getting out of the house. And we're like, all right. I said, okay, like, get out. And I got on the radio and I was telling them, this gentleman at this address, his house just caught fire. It was just on the phone. He's evacuating as well. And they're like 10-4. Like, it was nuts, man. But I don't know why, just in that moment, I remember hearing him and him asking me that question. And I'm thinking, dude, yeah, like leave. But then, he goes, my house is on fire now too. I gotta go. I was like, go.
The common sense was not so common. There's that
No.
phrase right there.
No, man. And yeah, that there's calls like that Those stick with me, but that one especially because I even now I think, dude, you saw that all this was going on. Get the hell out of your house. Save
Right.
yourself. Your insurance will pay for your house, okay? And
Right.
yeah, it was a big thing, man. That whole area got destroyed and it was in the news and it was something else. But yeah, some of those higher, profile calls and everything, in the sense of, big fires, like you're saying, those aren't ever there might be occasionally some of the ones that are minor, but a lot of them end up being big ones like that, where there's a lot of stuff that you have to do during that time.
Absolutely. And when you get into the proximity, like the cities and that stuff, that's one of the ones that you really start looking at going, now what are the exposures and what is the chance this is going to jump? Because you get that real close. I mean, some of them are gapped out by 10 feet, the houses down there. So I mean, if you have a fully involved house, it's not going to take a whole lot to jump over. So you
Mhm.
have a lot of just mitigation at that rate too. So
Yeah.
trying to prevent further fallout. It's a lot of fun or rather I should say it was a lot of fun. Absolutely.
Yeah, so and I mentioned high profile, so I want to get, and we've learned a lot about you and a lot of stuff that you've done, and kind of how you tick and everything. And I love it because every time I have someone on, we all just kind of relate because we're in that same mindset. We're from the same place. We're like, yeah, I do that too. Like, yeah, I'm not
Yep.
the only one. Um, but in your sense, coming out of where you were coming out of, there was a lot of shit that you've also been a part of. What I want to hit on first before we get into some of these riots and everything is so you've worked like Super Bowl, Final Four, and X Games. I can't even
Yep.
imagine an event to that scale for all three of those. The amount of stuff that goes in, like preparation alone, working with different teams, because now you don't have just the regular channels going on with everyone, you also have secondary. And like for us, we had one called Alltac, so we would have people on Alltac, we'd have people on secondary for like any concerts that were coming in, and you have all these different perimeters set up, and you're trying to run all of the regular 911 stuff plus all of the event stuff. And there's only so many of
Oh yeah.
you in there. So I mean, let's hit on some of these events. What was that even like? Like it just sounds like it would be
No,
chaos.
I yeah, controlled chaos is about exactly how I would describe that.
Hmm.
The funny thing about Minneapolis, so they jumped in right at the beginning of the 800 megahertz switchover, so the narrow banding.
Hmm.
The So they were on the up and up with the technology. However, the infrastructure didn't support some of the upgraded models, and so a lot of the channels were reduced capabilities. So they didn't have the channel range that they should have had. So we were utilizing capabilities that not necessarily should have been reserved for some of these, especially with the Super Bowl, because it's not just a city celebration. It's I mean, let's face it, on a broad scale, it is a national celebration, but for the surrounding area, it was definitely a regional endeavor. We had
Hmm.
I can't remember the number of police departments, but we had help from Wisconsin and the National Guard, obviously. So you're coordinating with a lot of these people, which require these capabilities, LTACs, STACs, that to be utilized that typically wouldn't be on a reserved and longevity type scale. So our operation date and period was 2 weeks for the Super Bowl. And that buildup was just intense. It was a long time. And we were working actually for that. It was staggered, but they were mandatory 12-hour shifts just because of the call volume and the influx of people and security that surrounds that sort of event. The NCAA, the Final Four, against that. So we had the opportunity to work on multiple different things, the Mac Center, so the kind of scene control and operations control, a couple of different places. So any trucks that were coming in were screened, pre-screened before coming into what they call the hot zone. So a lot of that we had the opportunity to go out there and work some of those, and I didn't do that. I stayed center in the 911 dispatch center there. But then for the Final Four, I actually had the opportunity to go to the MAC and then work actually at the convention center as a dispatch for that. And that was where a lot of the stuff, the colleges had booths and Minneapolis Convention Center in and of itself is just a massive building.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of cool to see the differences that come along with that one. And then the X Games definitely was on the smaller scale, because let's face it, where you have the collegiate basketball March Madness and the culmination of that with the Final Four, and then the Super Bowl being just a national event like that. The X Games has a smaller kind of niche almost market to it, where it was most of the stuff was condensed in and around the new dome site, the US Bank Stadium, and the surrounding blocks. But I was actually in the dome, and there's a now I'm thinking it's, if I remember right, it's called the SOC. So it's the operations center there, where we were up in, and we had the whole bird's eye view of the entire field and everything like that. And so then you dispatch specifically for that area, and you have the radio capability specifically for that area, and everything is you got a scene commander and all of that right there with you, which was really cool. And then the way that we had it set up, it was kind of funny. The poor little media gal was off to my right in the corner, and then it was myself, and then fire, and then EMS was all right in a row. So it was really neat. And I had a couple of chiefs down there at one point, EMS command. So we have everybody in one room, and so we're not having to, as far as our communications and stuff like that go, it's really actually quite seamless, especially on the football games and the stuff that is recurring, the concerts and that stuff. They've become really quite seamless as far as the response and the radio traffic goes, just because of that combined command center. So it was really cool to see the difference in the scaling. You get into that kind of NIMS, and that's where that kind of applies, the National Incident Management System, and how you can see how scalable it really is from like I said, the 2-week operations period for the Super Bowl down to a single day event. And then you get a couple events on either side for start off and wrap up.
You mentioned NIMS, and I kind of twitched.
Did you? I think my eyebrow, one of them definitely did good. That's not anything.
Yeah, for those who are watching and listening right now, if you don't know what NIMS is, I mean, I couldn't even explain it right now. But
I'm gonna interject here, Ricardo. Do yourself a favor and don't.
Yeah.
What was it? NIMS 100, 200, and 700 were one of the primary ones, and if they didn't repeat everything in just a different format for the most part, there were some variances to each, but the majority of it was very much so, and they were long.
Right. And that's what I was gonna get to. Those tests were so freaking long. And the stuff that I remember reading up on it, and by that time, I'm already kind of, my brain is fried. But then to take the tests that are taking forever with 100 and I don't know, I don't remember how many questions there were, but there were tons.
It was just unreal. Yeah, in all honesty, and this isn't putting it lightly, I'd rather take the MMP, was it MMPI 2 or something like. I'd rather take the psyche valves all over again for the job. Just that's 8 hours of grueling, repetitive. But I would rather sit through that and answer those questions than retake a NIMS test again. It was just, mind numbing.
Yes, that speaks volumes for those who are watching and listening. That's what we're talking about. But no, I get it as well. You're able to streamline a lot of process and everything, and having everyone there, and when everyone is working like a well-oiled machine, those big scale events don't seem as crazy because everyone is doing what they're doing and just working it. So we would have excuse me, we had a country festival that would come through, and it would be at our motor speedway in Martin, Michigan. And they don't do it there anymore, but they would come in, and I think my crew worked almost every one of them except for maybe one. And we would have that build up as well, where we're having these meetings, and we're trying to figure out who's going to be on what, who's going to be running different things, because they're going to need kind of a dedicated person who is running all the stuff. We would have 2 people out there doing it, but they would have one main contact there inside dispatch with us as well. So it was cool, because we always thought like craziness was going to be going on. And although it was going on out there, it didn't impact us too much in the center, because we had everything streamlined so much, and having 2 people out there already to be able to do it, it made it a hell of a lot easier than times in years prior to that. But what I cannot imagine though, because I've never dealt with this myself, that's the riots. And that's the riots in the area. And I actually want to talk about um, kind of the recent one with George Floyd. Now, you had said that you weren't there per se. You were coming back from like paternity leave, right?
Yep.
And you just kind of welcome back to dispatch. You just kind of come in and all of this chaos is going on.
So yeah, the way that it worked out, I wasn't there for the initial call that he was on for the actual call itself.
Hmm.
I walked in the day after the precinct fell. And so we got to actually, it was just incidental. I was cleaning my firearms, and I've always, from the fire response side, had a kind of a ditch bag, a go bag, and we got a page that just said any and all available dispatchers, please respond to the center as soon as possible, and that was about it. And I was kind of living in a bubble. I turned off almost all social media minus the standard updates on the baby, and I had no idea what was boiling in the outside world. And kind of like I had touched on, I walked in 2011 or 2014 rather, shortly after all of the Ferguson stuff had all transpired. And so we had seen a couple of them, the Jamar Clarks, the Justine Damond, the Philando Castile, like I said, in the adjacent PSAP, and that whole incident takes the cake. I mean, as we know, the civil unrest kind of fueled by the COVID lockdowns and all of that just came about from it is it's an experience that a lot of people will look back on and go, you actually, what was it like for you just because of that? And it was where I said the Super Bowl was controlled chaos. This was the definition of chaos. There was no controlling it. Like I said earlier, fire dispatch was regimented. If this happened, then this happened, then this happened. It was very, very cut and dry. It was very procedural. Police is dynamic. And, I always allude to there's no standard domestic. It can be a scatter shot, and it's a 1,000 different ways that any particular second can go. This one, where you can kind of anticipate based on the demeanor of an individual and the call on a standard, quote unquote, standard domestic, there was no anticipation. There was no preparation for the next move. There was no, it was purely response oriented, just because you had no idea what that mob was going to do next. And where I talk about that cohesion, it wasn't necessarily stretched based on the mentality in that down there, but the tensions then were definitely high. And it was something that was incredibly palpable. You walk in, and when we got rid of the overring tone, we wound up installing Ricardo, they had to have been 72-inch screens, and they'd flash red. And when it goes red, then that means that you're in overring. And when you look at the phones and you walk in and you see that entire tree lit up, it looks like Christmas down there, all these oranges, yellows, greens, reds. And you see then in the abandoned queue that, the calls that weren't answered. At one point, I was working on Channel 1, which had dedicated Precinct 3, which is where the precinct was and the incident all occurred, down at Chicago. I had a break in the action, and I glanced over at the phones, and there was over 300 abandoned calls with the entire tree lit up. And that's non-emergency, emergency, and transfer lines, and all of that. People were just calling nonstop. It was, chaos, madness. I mean, we managed to get through it, but there was no way and protocol was going that protocol was ever going to handle that. When I talk about NIMS, there was not a whole lot of structure there. I mean, it was shit show doesn't even describe it. When you have the National Guard coming in, and it was a delayed response at that, and we had people calling for them to come in prior to their actual prior to their actual arrival, and then the reduced numbers that they thought was going to work, and they had to crank it up. I think they had, now it's been a while, but they had 500 respond, and then they cranked it up by like another 1,500 or 1,000. And you got officers that are out for medical. You've got officers that are not responding at that point, that are putting in their resignations. It was, in your work and mandatory 12 hours again, not necessarily out of rotation like we did on the Super Bowl side, but you've got coworkers that are then distraught because you have people literally getting on the phone from other countries praying that they get raped and killed on the way home. That was the day. And I'm going, the malice and the lack of understanding from the general public as to what the perception of 911 is, and what is going on with what the media is portraying as quote unquote mostly peaceful protests. And like I said, prior to going live here, I mentioned that we had the Capella Tower camera, and you could see just the entire city glowing and the hot spots for the fires. The one particular night that stands out for me, it was when the protest went onto the freeway, and most people in the general public know that you are not allowed on the freeway. So blocking these freeways is actually inherently against the law. And they actually they had just after the operations period had commenced on that one, they actually shut down a protest on 94, and they arrested something like 250 people for it. But that tanker came through. If you remember, on the 35W bridge there over the Mississippi, that tanker came through because they hadn't shut down the freeway. They hadn't told anybody with the police escorts that they were going onto the freeway. And the guy was exonerated of any wrongdoing and was never tried or charged or anything like that because of that lack of shutdown. Well, everything came out, and they came up burning Washington Avenue and that was the way that I'd come off. And so that night we wound up with a fire at Lake in Chicago, and there were 2 fire teams that were on there. And that was, like I had alluded to, the initial response or the first alarm assignment, our fire strike teams were significantly smaller, and they kind of looked more like an initial response, which was 2 engines, either a ladder and a rescue and a chief. And that was for anything like a fire alarm. They just kind of more investigatory versus an actual alarm and confirmed fire. So it was kind of like that. And they're kind of a hotspot style team where they were just running to random fires all throughout the city. And so it was the night after the precinct was relinquished, and they were nailed down by agitators and rioters launching Molotov cocktails and mortars at these teams. And it was only the second time in my entire career where I had interop between fire command and police command on the same radio station. I had 2 strike teams and then a MAC team out of Dakota County that was incoming. it was either Trooper 7 or 8 over the top of the scene, calling all the shots, going, we've got this number of agitators coming in from this alley on this intersection. We've got them coming on this number here. And then we've got command calling out that they need to get fire out of there. And what ended up happening was the gas station, they had burned the internal the station itself, where the emergency shutoff switch was that feeds the power to the pumps. The pumps were still operating and just pumping fuel into an inferno, essentially. So they were they're waiting for the pumps either to run dry or to fail or something like that. But police command is calling out, we got to get you out of here. You got to get out of here. Well, with the curfew and everybody being in there, and like I had alluded to earlier, that close proximity of the city housing, a lot of those balloon structures in particular, where there's no fire breaks between the studs. And so you literally can have fire run from the basement to the upper level with no break whatsoever in these older style homes. And everybody on lockdown and curfew, the fire command goes, we cannot leave. There will be immeasurable casualties as a result of this. So they took the pelting, they took the beating, and it went on for hours. And at the end of it, I remember handing over, and I felt guilty because at the end of shift, I wound up being relieved. I felt guilty handing it over just because I had that scene. That was my scene. And I told the gal, I said, this is what's going on. And she kind of looked at me and goes, okay. And she jumped right in and got down to it. And I walked out of there, and I kind of held my head, and I'm going, what in the hell is going on? And you talk about defining moments in one's life and that sort of thing. It was at that moment where I realized, where's this all going? How is this all trending? And starting to associate that with my personal life and how it's impacting myself. And that was one of the original catalysts actually for my departure in public safety and as a whole. And that whole situation right there, I remember I got out, and now Minneapolis, they call them, it's kind of like a split pairs where one side of the block goes one direction and then it's a one-way street. So then the other side of the block goes the other way. And so where we park, our parking ramp, you have to get out. And if you want to go back to Washington, you have to get to the freeway. You have to double back just where the exits are on the exit ramp. And so doubling back, though, with the way that the one-way streets are, you double back past the Sally Port to the county jail where everybody was coming off. It looked like party buses, but at chain gangs. People were zip tied all up and they had it all diked and sandbagged. National Guard was standing there. And I hit Washington Ave, and there was a couple of burnt car hulls. One of them was a Chevy Impala. Not a single bus stop wasn't destroyed, glass out of it or on fire. Graffiti all up and down the road. It looked like scenes out of Fallujah and Baghdad after the initial airstrikes all those years ago. And I distinctly remember I flashed my badge to get onto the freeway, and I just mashed the throttle. And, God willing, I got out of there. And I remember I hit the 35E 35W and 36 corridor interchange. 36 goes eastbound from there, and 35W jets northbound. There's a real sharp kind of 50-mile-an-hour corner, and I broke down. It was the only time in my entire life that I'd actually had a panic attack, and I cried pretty much almost the entire way home. Got home and I held my girls, and they didn't know. I mean, they were all out cold. It was 2:33. I got off at 2:30 in the morning. Got home by about 3:30, and yeah, that was just it. That was the most emotionally taxing day of my entire life, right there, career wise, I should say. And that right there was, I will never forget it. I'll never forget the entire anything that had been said. I'll remember the names of the parties that were involved, my primary contact on police, who was all talking to me about that sort of thing. The MAC team, I remember that was Dakota County was talking to me about that. They contacted me on my actual station console's line. And so I gave the information to the supervisors, but something got lost in translation just because, let's face it, like I said, the chaos. And so they didn't understand what was coming into it. And then they got a call at the supervisor station about it. And they were asking about the resources that were coming in from that. And I said, I didn't have anything specific on it. So by the time that I got off shift, it had all been worked out, but that was some of their stuff, their upper level, kind of like a SWAT style response that they were sending to assist with the riots essentially at that point. So yeah, it was,
damn.
There is not a singular word or a grouping of words to effectively convey what we all endured down there. And I do say endured because that right there, no matter how tenured or weathered or anything like that, there's definitely either a scar or an additional wrinkle or something like that was added as a result of that operation period. Absolutely.
Oh man, that just listening to you say it, like my jaw's been dropped. I'm like holding my breath as you're talking, and dude, that is just crazy. So okay, so let me back up a little bit because I want to kind of put this into perspective a little bit for those who are watching and listening. How many people do you usually have on when you were there at the center working at a time?
Yeah, so normally any given time, I would say average, we've got 4 call takers. It varies, 3 to 5, 6, depending on the time of the day, rush hour. Typically we have a few more. Then there's data, which is the primary, and kind of like fire, they have an auxiliary, but it's a predominant phone's position of backup data for anything like if they get into the weeds with off duties, logging in and signing off and that stuff. So they can assist with that. And then, so there's 2 there typically, and then 3 dispatchers for the majority of the day with the relief dispatchers. So there's 4 there. So what are we up to? We're up to 6, call it 10, and then 2 fire dispatchers on. So there's about anywhere on typical from 12 to 14 people that were down there at any given time, not counting the supervisory staff, because sometimes there was 1, sometimes there were 2. So, and they could actually be auxiliary phones as well.
So, okay, so let's say we've got about 15 or 16 people that are there, those with auxiliary phones and such as well. And there's this call out, this all hands on deck, if you will, type call that goes out to bring everybody in who can come in as much as possible. And you've got, I think you had said earlier, there's like a total of 11 or 12 like phone positions that people can actually be on, right? So then
Yep.
you've got, let's just say those 12 people on phones. You've got two other, or three other phone positions. And then you've got whatever the population is, but also the chaos that is going on from all of these riots. You already mentioned in the beginning, you're coming in and the phone's lit up like a Christmas tree. There's 300 abandoned calls. I mean, those are presents that you're forced to take if we're thinking Christmas terms here in
Yeah.
in those, what everything that's lit up there. That is a lot for all of you to be able to handle. Um
There's, yeah.
I even going through that just now, it's hard to fathom going through it. And I mean, I can't even imagine the types of calls you're receiving as well, because there's so many that are coming in. And we come into this wanting to help everyone as much as possible, but then you got to try to move fast, but also triage all these other calls that are coming in. Who is getting, who's going to be getting whatever help first. But it's not a first come I mean, it's a first come first serve, but it actually goes into the highest priority, how many people are available. There's so many different variables, but in this situation, it's like everything is priority one.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and that was just it. So, some of the things that they didn't really broadcast, what ended up happening was they had put out bolo on any vehicle that didn't have license plates. So
Mhm.
what we were finding was a majority of the arrests were coming out of Ohio, Colorado, and Washington state. So they were out of state agitators that were coming in and
Oh
essentially just
geez.
burning the city. So, while some of it may have been predominantly on the peaceful and the protests and that stuff, a lot of them were, well, rather radical groups. It was a different aspect from what the media had spun and
Right.
what we were seeing on the traffic cams, live feed, live action, over the radio, and all of that stuff as well. So it was very interesting to see how sometimes the public perception can be skewed as a result of all of that versus what you're actually going through. So when you say, no, that is not what happened at all, this is really what happened, and then somebody goes, no way. I go, there's so many times in life, and like I had said earlier, reality is so much more obscure and obtuse than anything that a lot of these people's imaginations could come up with. And I said, this is definitely one of them, where you don't have that if you don't have that front seat and you're not living it. There was definitely that cognitive dissonance. And if you're watching the mass majority of it via screen or something like that, and you're not there living it, there was a lot of misconception rather, out of the vast majority of the public. I was talking to a lot of friends and stuff like that, afterwards, after it all died down, and I kind of started processing a lot of it. And they go, you actually, that's what happened. I said, and so much more that I'm sure, just because what was all going on and my ability to comprehend, and that threshold being at the red line that entire time, that just escaped even my awareness and my own comprehension, just because
Mhm.
there was, it's kind of like a shotgun versus a rifle. Like I said, with those vehicle fleets and those pursuits, that singular call, you have one individual being impacted, whereas you get a scatter shot and a broad range on that with a shotgun and bird shot. That was kind of that sort of scenario. You have everybody, and when you have those singular events like a flee or a pursuit, and it's not busy, you have that room awareness, and people are picking up on that, and then they're offering assistance, and they're helping you out and doing certain things and that sort of stuff, notifying adjacent agencies predominantly. Whereas this one, with that bird shot, everybody was tied up, and the communication in a communication center, you can do so much, but when you have so much on your plate, sending out notices even was greatly diminished, just based on, at that point, you're getting 5 of them, and then which one is even more important, because how many fires can you respond to, how many fires can you be aware of, how many agitators can you be aware of? So you're working an event within a mass scale, and that was pretty much where your world was. So yeah, it was, there is no real way to wrap that one in general. Like a couple of the others that I had mentioned, Jim R. Clark and the Philando Castile, the protests and demonstrations that came from that, it kind of goes back to the scale of Super Bowl versus X Games.
Mhm.
So yeah, that, like I said, that was the one pivotal moment where I started to kind of take a look at what I was doing and how it was personally impacting me, and then not just myself, but my family and my children who are younger and developing and really starting to kind of come into awareness of what's going on around them and awareness of other people and their emotions. And so that was the initial catalyst. Like I'd said, prior to going live here, two other real big events there was leaving the fire department with that lung condition. I was part of the old school, going to overhaul on a fire, and you don't wear a mask, but because there's no smoke, you don't have any trouble. Well, there's still carcinogens. So I mean, that was something that I kind of pay the price for. I wouldn't ever regret anything. But the second one, and I lay this out for a lot of people that kind of tend to struggle, but rather the final one was my mom's passing, and I had. It's always there's so much that you want to say or cram into a very short amount of time when somebody's on hospice and they're aware of the their impending death. And the biggest question to me at that point was if she would do it all over again. Looking back, you're at the terminus of your life, that ending moment. There's a definition at that rate where you have the opportunity to say, and you're aware of it, yeah, I would do it all over again. And she had been diagnosed with breast cancer in September of 2017, and she passed in September 2020. So almost 3 years to the day. And I said, everything that you had gone through, they put her through chemo, and then they put her through the bilateral mastectomies, and then they put her through bunch of different radiation, and they go, if you do this radiation, you're going to have an 80% reduced chance of recurrence. And her body goes, I like those 20% odds, and then cram it through the rest of your system. I asked her, I said, after all of that disappointment, I said, 3 years of just utter shit. I said, pain, suffering, and all of that. I said, would you go back and do it all over again? And Ricardo, she looked at me, and no joke, this was 3 weeks before she passed. And she said, in a heartbeat, absolutely. And she goes, because what we want in life, and especially towards the end, is more time. She goes, both in quality and quantity. She goes, I got to see you get married. I got to see 2 granddaughters be born. My sister graduate high school. My brother graduate college. And my other sister bought a house. She goes, those are memories that I take with me. And that's the only thing that I get to take with me. And I would not have had that had I given up at that moment. They said that with the natural progression and the rate of progression on her cancer, she would have passed by November of that same year of her diagnosis. And that was the hard stop moment right there. And, I can never say that I would ever regret any time that I had spent in public safety. There are, to say, countless lives that I have saved, both through the response on the phones and as a responder on scene. You can't diminish that through regret. But I looked back and I go, what can I do going forward to be there for my family and to then subsequently be the best person that I can at that rate? Because with that defining moment and the events of the riots in 2020 there, and subsequently a lot of that stuff, as you know, a lot of responders are very good at compartmentalization. You know what I mean? You put it in a neat little box, put a bow on it, tuck it away. It's back in storage. You don't have to open it up again. Sometimes maybe a state of mind recall or something may come up where you, oh yeah, that's right, that happened. And then you tuck it back away into the corner again and it's there. But it was when my mom passed and living through that in those final days with her in that regard, where I watched her really kind of go downhill and hit that comatose state. That was when those battlements and those walls that I had fortified over years crumbled. They became a house of cards and everything came down. And I looked really long and hard at everything that had transpired and how it was affecting me mentally and physically, and just because of the physical manifestation of stress in and of itself. I mean, I think I lost close to 20 pounds from September up until December of 2020, just because of just that stress and that loss, that physical, the physical manifestation of that loss. And I looked back and I go, I've got to do more for my family at this point. To be in public safety for me, then it had become selfish because I still had more left in the tank when I resigned the fire department. I wanted to respond, but my lungs, if something had happened to me on scene and subsequently somebody had gotten hurt because something had happened to me and I created a secondary scene, if I had survived that, I couldn't have lived with myself. You know what I mean? It's the same thing. Like you talk about when you listen to me respond or talk about the fire response and the dispatch and how you get nostalgic. And it's the same thing. Like I keep in contact with so many people down there and close lifelong friends that, they'll send me a snippet of a call and they'll go, hey, and then I'll go, I miss that, because I get a lot of my family is in sales and insurance and all of that now, but I'll be damned if I wasn't the one that had the best stories every holiday that came around.
Right. Yeah.
I could go, oh yeah, I'm working on this sale right now, or I'm working on helping this customer out, but it pales to compare to, well, yeah, I had this guy that was, they wound up coding and I got him back, and it just, you start going all of that stuff and they go, really? So a lot of people don't do that really. And they ask the follow-up questions, but yeah, that explains the transition there. But it definitely, it was the most rewarding career of my entire life. That public safety, I got to tell you, I wish that, like I said, we had the opportunity to tell people that they had to go through a public safety course in high school just to graduate, just so that they had an understanding.
Right.
But really, a lot of these other countries, they do a mandatory 2 years public service or military service, something like that. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it's like Switzerland or Sweden or Norway, something like that. One of those Northern European countries has that mandatory 2 years service. And it kind of gives you an idea that, one, it builds up camaraderie, but then the understanding of what it means to actually serve. And kind of going back to Kennedy's statement, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. I think that would be, if people had more of an understanding of what all goes on there would be a lot less division. And a lot of these things, these riots and these people would be more independent. The public would be more independent thinking because they would have that knowledge of the system and everything along those lines. And it's kind of a disservice to our country at that rate. But I think that, in all honesty, if people had that experience there, it's from the response side, like I had said, holding on to somebody's hand and you're that tether to answering. I can't even remember. It was in excess of 250 calls in a 12-hour period is what I'd answered. Not even during the riots, but just in general. That was one of them was a storm response. We'd gone over power lines down and all that stuff. It was just call after call after call after call. It wasn't anything that was major on a major scale like that. It was a more individualized, isolated events, just mass scale of them. But everything from that, to put all of that all together, it was by far and away the most rewarding and, like you say, unique and experience of my entire life. And it's like I said, I couldn't ever regret it, the physical stuff that comes along with it or anything that came along with the mentality and PTSD and that stuff. But I look back and I go, yeah, that was at this rate, the riots have become more of a footnote than anything that would be defining, just because of, I think back and I don't think on holy cow, the chaos and all of that stuff that comes from it and the trauma that comes from it. I think of, we got one hell of a crew down there, and the ability that they had to overcome that and to work in a setting like that and to get through that was just, that's second to none. I think that in all honesty, and it's not to downplay because I was never in the service, but there's bonds that can be forged in certain circumstances. And that's one of those ones that I would equate to almost like active duty military, where you get into the thick of things and you're in a forward scene or something along those lines. And it was very much so that same kind of situation and setting. Absolutely was.
Awesome. Damn, man. This has been really good to have you on this episode. learned so much about you, your just thoughts of public safety and everything, and how, the impact has been on you, but especially, talking about what it was like during the riots and all of this. And for one, thank you for your service and public safety and everything that you did. You're no longer in it, but I just listening to you talk and everything, as we were saying, getting nostalgic and everything. It's, it's there, it's always going to
Yeah.
be, in your blood, that public safety part of it. um as we go into the wrap up of this episode, I got one last question, and that is for anyone who is looking to get into public safety. I guess, what is some advice that you have, for any of those who are going to be coming into this, and, just kind of based off your experience, and, how it is, making your transition out of public safety as well. What is some advice that you might have for those who are looking at getting into this profession?
Absolutely. I should say, and I remember I talked to somebody about it. They were looking to get into it. Actually, it was my cousin. It's not something that I say do so lightly. It is a commitment, and it's addicting, but it's also almost a selfish sort of system that it is, because you're working rotating days, you're working holidays, you're working birthdays, you're missing events because you've got to get somebody to cover those seats, and that's where you're at, or cover that shift, and you're the one that's got to do it. But on the flip side, like I said, and my knowledge of the career paths and choices is rather limited in that it surrounds public safety, but there are very few, if I can imagine, careers that would be more rewarding at their pinnacle and at the height and the defining moments than being in public safety, as a firefighter, as a first responder, as a dispatcher. I mean, even in security, it all had its moments. And there's, at the end of the day, as long as you're still upright and you're in a good mentality, I would say keep doing it, because you have, like I said, there are those bonds that you get. There are those moments, and depending on the day, they may be few and far in between. But when you have somebody call up and they say, "You helped me through that, and thank you so much from the bottom of my heart," there is not any more of a sincere gratitude than those moments right there. And it doesn't matter if they're a month apart or 6 months apart or a week apart. Whenever they come in, it's just that one, those moments are the tethering thing, and use those then to kind of fuel that flame and that desire to keep going forward, because it can be physically taxing, it can be emotionally taxing, but in the end, there is a massive portion of the society, and I like to think it is in the majority, that appreciates our responders and all the work that they do, and they understand. Some of them maybe on a significantly lower end, but they understand the trials and tribulations that come along with it. And it really is a very, what's the word I'm looking for? A very, not self-satisfying or anything like that, a very rewarding career. Absolutely. So, but like I said, don't do so lightly, but at the same time, you're not going to find something that's more dynamic and more entertaining and more rewarding in that regard.
Awesome. Thank you, man, very much for
Absolutely.
being on.
Thank you for having me.
This has been excellent. And I don't even know how to it's just been so good to have you on here and just hear all of this. And man, if you ever want to come back on and talk some more, I would be all about it.
Well, thank you.
It would be good. I'll be right back here with you in just one moment. And for those who are watching and listening, if you have any comments, questions, or you want to be a guest on the show, you can email us, and that's going to be wttpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, that's going to be wttpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter. That is @91podcast. You can like us on Facebook. That is facebook.com/Within the Trenches Podcast. This episode has been sponsored by InDigital, Rapid Deploy, as well as Carbine. And if you're looking for any bonus content, you can check us out and support us here, patreon.com/WTT Podcast. This can be seen on Facebook as well as YouTube and Twitter, and you can hear 24/7 on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, your favorite podcasting app, and withinthetrenches.net. Have a good one, everyone. We'll see you in the next one.